The HOA fined me $150 a day for refusing to move my yacht, the same small boat my late wife named Hope Floats. The HOA president, Pamela, stood on my lawn with a smug smile, calling our boat an eyesore and threatening to put a lien on my house. They slapped violation signs on my dock and tried to turn the entire neighborhood against me. But while they were busy playing kingdom, they had no idea my revenge plan involved buying the entire lake right out from under them. You see, they never checked the deed for what was underwater. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, because this story is just getting started. And if you believe homeowners deserve to be left in peace, hit subscribe. You're about to see what happens when a power-hungry HOA picks a fight with a retired Navy engineer. The old two-stroke engine coughed once, then settled into a low, familiar rumble that vibrated right up through the soles of my boots. I eased the throttle, letting the Hope Floats drift the last few feet into the cove. The water here was always calmer, sheltered by a stand of old-growth pines that stood like silent guardians on the shore. I cut the engine, and the silence that followed was the kind you can feel in your chest. This was her spot. My wife, Sarah, had picked it out years ago. During her chemo treatments, when the world got too loud and the future too uncertain, we'd come out here. She'd sit in the deck chair, a blanket over her lap even in the summer, and just watch the light dance on the water. She said it was the only place where she didn't feel like a patient. She just felt like Sarah. The boat wasn't much, a 28-foot cabin cruiser from the early 90s, built like a tank and just as slow. I'd spent more hours in her engine bay than I had on the deck, but she was solid. After Sarah passed, I painted her name on the transom myself, in the same neat block letters she used to use for her garden labels. Hope Floats. It was the last thing she said to me that made me laugh. Now, the boat was my anchor, not just to the lakebed but to her. The cabin was modest, the galley small, but everything had its place. A system born of my years as a Navy engineer. I believed in order. I believed things should work the way they're designed to. That's why the sight of the gleaming white SUV parked in my driveway, precisely where the asphalt met my lawn, set my teeth on edge. A woman stood beside it, clipboard in hand, staring out at my boat with an expression that could curdle milk. I knew who she was before she ever opened her mouth. Pamela Greer, the HOA president. I'd seen her at community meetings, her voice always a little too loud, her smile a little too tight. She ran the neighborhood like it was her own private kingdom. I moored the boat to my small dock, a structure I'd built myself to Navy code, and walked up the gentle slope of the yard. Pamela didn't move until I was 10 feet away. "Mr. Braddock," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. "That's a lovely view you have." She gestured with her pen toward the lake, but her eyes stayed locked on me. "The board feels it's being compromised." I just waited. I learned a long time ago that the man who talks first in a standoff is usually the one with the weaker position. She didn't like the silence. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. "The vessel," she said, pronouncing the word like it was something foreign and distasteful. "It cannot be moored there. It disrupts the visual uniformity of the shoreline from the common areas." I looked out at my boat, then back at her. The common area she was referring to was a small patch of grass with a single bench over 100 yards away, mostly obscured by trees. "It's my dock, Pamela," I said, my voice quiet. "And it's been there for 20 years. The boat's been there for 2 weeks." She tapped her clipboard. According to a recently clarified interpretation of Bylaw 7.4, no personal watercraft can be docked in a way that obstructs the natural aesthetic. It constitutes a private nuisance. I'd read the CCRs cover to cover when I bought the place. I'd read them again when this HOA started getting aggressive a few years back. There was nothing about boat docks or visual uniformity. It was a document about maintaining fences and keeping your grass cut. "I think you'll find that's not in the bylaws," I said calmly. I'd be happy to go over the document with you. Her smile became a thin, hard line. It's a board-level interpretation, Mr. Braddock. Not something we expect every resident to understand. We're asking you to move the boat to a commercial marina. Non-compliance will result in escalating daily fines. She was standing on my grass, her expensive-looking heels sinking slightly into the turf, telling me what I could and could not do on the property my wife and I had poured our lives into. I just nodded slowly. I'll look into it. It was a dismissal, and she knew it. She huffed, a small, indignant sound, then turned on her heel and marched back to her pristine SUV, leaving 2 small divots in my lawn. I went inside and pulled my copy of the HOA covenants from the filing cabinet. Just as I thought. The document was 30 pages of rules about roof shingles, mailbox colors, and holiday decorations. The word lake appeared twice, only in reference to the official property survey map. There was no bylaw, 7.4. There was no mention of boats, docks, or visual uniformity. She had made it all up. I tried calling her, thinking a simple conversation could clear it up. It went straight to a full voicemail box. I tried emailing, no response. The next day, there was a certified letter in my mailbox. The green slip felt heavy in my hand. Inside, on thick embossed letterhead, was a formal notice of violation. It cited the non-existent bylaw 7.4 and informed me that a fine of $150 per day was being levied against my property, retroactive to the day I first moored the Hope floats in the cove. The total was already over $2,000. The last paragraph was the real punch in the gut. It was a formal warning that if the fines went unpaid, the HOA would place a lien on my home. They were threatening to take my house. Because of a boat. My wife's boat. I stood on the dock for a long time, the letter crumpled in my fist, and stared out at the water. The sun was setting, painting the surface in shades of orange and purple, the same way Sarah had loved. A cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. It was the same feeling I used to get on a salvage dive, right before entering a wreck. A calm, focused clarity, where emotion burns away and only the mission remains. You picked the wrong man's lake, Pamela. Pamela didn't wait long to escalate. The next morning, my neighbor Roy Tran called me. Roy's a Vietnam vet, a retired electrician who's seen it all and isn't impressed by much. You better check your email, Tom, he said, his voice flat with disapproval. The Queen Bee sent out a community bulletin. I opened my laptop. There it was, an email with the subject line, "Urgent update regarding shoreline integrity." Attached was a photo of the Hope floats, taken from a distance, making her look lonely and out of place. The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive nonsense. Pamela wrote about unauthorized long-term moorage and the potential negative impact on property valuations for all residents. She never used my name, just referring to the property on Lot 18. It was a classic move, isolating the target while pretending to act in the interest of the whole. The message was clear: get in line or you're next. The neighborhood shifted overnight. The friendly waves from across the street stopped. People who used to nod as they walked their dogs now found something fascinating to look at on their phones. They weren't hostile, not yet. They were scared. They knew Pamela's tactics. They'd seen her fine an elderly couple for having a garden gnome that was 2 inches too tall and force another family to repaint their entire house because the approved shade of beige had been discontinued. They were keeping their heads down, and I couldn't blame them. But the silence felt heavy, like a fog rolling in off the lake. That evening, my daughter Maya called. Her voice was tight with worry. "Dad, I heard what's going on. One of my old high school friends lives in your neighborhood." She sent me a screenshot of some email. I could picture her pacing in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. "Just sell the boat, Dad, please. It's not worth the stress. You don't need this fight." I knew she meant well. She'd watched me care for her mother. She'd seen what years of stress could do. To her, the boat was just a thing, an object causing a problem that could be solved by removing it. I can't do that, honey, I said, my voice softer than I intended. Why not? It's an old boat. It's a money pit. Mom would not want you to go through all this trouble. That stung. Your mom loved that boat, I said, keeping my voice level. It's not about the trouble. It's about letting someone like that win. There was a long silence on the line. Okay, Dad, she said finally, her voice laced with resignation. Just be careful. We hung up, and the house felt emptier than it had in a long time. She thought I was being stubborn. Maybe I was. But this wasn't about a boat anymore. This was about a bully standing on my lawn, telling me my memories were an eyesore. I'm an engineer. When a system is broken, you don't just complain about it. You find the schematics. You identify the faulty component, and you fix it. The next morning, I made a pot of coffee and sat down with a legal pad. I wasn't going to fight Pamela on her terms. She controlled the HOA, the bylaws, the narrative. I had to find a different system to operate in. My first call was to the State Water Commission. I got passed around 3 times before I landed on the desk of a man who sounded profoundly bored. I explained the situation calmly, leaving out the HOA drama and sticking to the facts. I owned lakefront property and wanted to confirm the riparian rights associated with my deed. He asked me to wait. I could hear him typing, the slow, deliberate clicks of a man navigating an ancient government database. Okay, I've got the parcel maps here, he said after a few minutes. Your property line extends to the high water mark, standard stuff. And the lake itself? I asked. Who owns the lakebed? Another long pause. More typing. That's interesting, he mumbled. Looks like the lake isn't owned by the municipality or the county. And it's definitely not owned by your HOA. I wrote that down and underlined it twice. So who owns it? I asked. According to our records, he said, his voice a little more engaged now, the lakebed and associated rights belong to the Lakeside Development Corporation. That was a start. It was a piece of solid ground in a swamp of lies. It was hope. The hope lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, I went down to the dock with my coffee, and my heart sank. Zip-tied to my hand-built railing were 2 cheap laminated signs. In bold red letters, they read, Non-compliant property, violation #7. 4. It was a public shaming, a scarlet letter for everyone on the lake to see. As I stood there, my hand wrapped so tight around my mug, my knuckles were white. My phone buzzed. It was Roy again. Don't get mad, Tom. Just look at the neighborhood Facebook group. I wasn't on Facebook, but Maya had set up an account for me years ago so I could see pictures of the grandkids. I found the group. The top post was from Pamela. It was a photo of the signs on my dock, with the hope floats in the background. The caption read, It's a shame when one resident's refusal to cooperate puts everyone's property values at risk. The eyesore on Lot 18 continues to be a problem, but rest assured, your board is taking decisive action. The comments were a mix of anonymous support for the HOA and a few timid questions. But the poison was already working. We were now the problem neighbors. Later that afternoon, I was cleaning out the gutters when a silver sedan I didn't recognize slowed to a crawl in front of my house. A man was in the passenger seat, holding a camera with a long lens. He was taking pictures of my house, my yard, my dock. I took a step off the ladder, and my movement caught his eye. The driver hit the gas, and the car peeled away down the street. It wasn't just signs and emails anymore. They were watching me. It was an act of intimidation, plain and simple. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the boat, bobbing gently in the cove. They had tried to isolate me from my neighbors. They had tried to turn my own daughter against my course of action. Now they were documenting my home like it was a crime scene. I finally understood. The rules weren't the point. The fines weren't the point. The boat wasn't the point. This was never about a boat. It was about control. And I was about to show Pamela Greer what happens when you try to control a man who has spent his entire life mastering systems far more complex and far more dangerous than her little kingdom. My years in the Navy weren't spent behind a desk. For the first decade, I was a salvage diver. We went into the dark, into places no one wanted to be, to recover things that were broken or lost. You learn to see structures not just for what they are, but for what they're connected to. You learn that what you see on the surface is only a fraction of the story. The real systems, the critical weaknesses, are almost always underwater. Pamela Greer saw a boat. I was starting to see the entire unseen framework her little kingdom was built on, and I was pretty sure it was rotten at the foundation. Her power came from a rule book she invented as she went along. My power was about to come from a different kind of rule book, one written in property laws and survey maps, sealed and stamped by the county. I drove down to the county records office the next day. It was a sterile, beige building that smelled of old paper and dust. I started with the name the man from the Water Commission had given me, Lakeside Development Corporation. The clerk, a woman named Carol, with a tired expression and glasses perched on the end of her nose, pointed me toward a bank of microfilm readers. It took me 2 hours of scrolling through fuzzy black and white documents, but I found it. The corporation had been formed in 1978 to develop our subdivision. They'd bought the original parcel of land, including the small natural lake. They'd plotted out the lots, paved the roads, and then, in 1989, after the last house was sold, they had simply dissolved. According to the corporate charter, all remaining assets were supposed to be turned over to the county. The land for the roads had been, the small common area had been, but the lake? The parcel of land that was under the water? There was no record of a transfer. It was a loose thread, an oversight, a piece of the system that had been forgotten for over 30 years. I took my findings back to Carol's desk. She looked over my notes with a distinct lack of interest. "That's all we have," she said, already looking past me to the next person in line. "The developer dissolved. The property is unlisted. So who has use rights to it now?" I asked, keeping my voice patient. "If the county is the owner of record by default, who manages it?" She gave a slight shrug. "Not sure. Could be anyone. Maybe the HOA? They do the upkeep, don't they?" Her casual guess was the entire basis of Pamela's authority. Maybe. A maybe was all Pamela needed to write her own rules, to levy fines, to threaten people's homes. She was an empress ruling over a kingdom she didn't even own, and no one had ever bothered to check the deed. I knew arguing with Carol would be pointless. She was a gatekeeper, not a problem solver. Pushing her would only get me labeled as a crank. I thanked her for her time and walked out into the bright sunlight, the key to the entire mess sitting right in my pocket notebook. Some problems you can't solve with a bigger wrench. Sometimes you need a different set of tools altogether. The next day, I didn't call the HOA. I didn't write a letter. I called a private real estate attorney, a man whose specialty was complicated title disputes and land use law. I sat in his quiet, wood-paneled office and laid out everything I had found, from the certified fine letter to the microfilm printouts of the dissolved corporation. He listened without interruption, occasionally making a small note on a yellow legal pad. When I was finished, he leaned back in his leather chair, and a slow grin spread across his face. "Mr. Braddock," he said, "this is fascinating. They built a house of cards on a foundation they don't own. We spent the next week quietly preparing. My attorney confirmed my research. The lakebed was an orphaned asset. It had technically reverted to county ownership, but because it produced no tax revenue and had no official function, it sat in a legal gray area, unclaimed and unmanaged. It was a forgotten piece of property. And forgotten property, under certain state statutes, can be claimed. We weren't just going to fight back against the HOA's illegal fines. We were going to pull the rug out from under them entirely." He drew up the paperwork for me to file a claim on the unmanaged parcels. This included not just the lakebed itself, but also the riparian rights, the legal right to access and use the water. It was a long shot, but the law was on our side. The county had no interest in managing a residential lake, and no one else had ever asserted a claim. While he handled the official filings, I began my own research. I pulled up bathymetric charts of the lake I'd made years ago when I was first mapping it out for fishing spots. I cross-referenced them with the old survey maps from the county. I studied mineral rights, water table levels, and drainage easements. I was learning the battlefield, every inch of it, seen and unseen. Pamela was busy taking pictures and posting on Facebook. I was preparing for a war she didn't even know was coming. The first public step was a small one, designed to be completely invisible to anyone not looking for it. As required by law for a claim on abandoned property, we had to post a public notice. My attorney placed a small block ad in the classified section of the county's legal paper. It was buried between notices for probate court and a zoning change for a cell phone tower. In dry, technical language, it stated that the unclaimed riparian rights and submerged land parcels of Lakeview Point were subject to a pending private sale and claim. It was a flare fired in the dead of night that only the system would see. The HOA board wouldn't see it. They were too busy reading their own community bulletin. They had no idea that I wasn't just fighting a fine. I was laying a trap, and they were about to walk right into it. While my attorney's plan was quietly moving through the gears of the county bureaucracy, Pamela decided it was time to drop the hammer. Another certified letter arrived, this one thicker than the last. Inside was a formal notice that the HOA had filed a lien against my property for nearly $5,000 in unpaid fines. They were making their move to take my house. But they weren't just relying on paperwork. 3 days later, I was in my workshop, fine-tuning the carburetor on my lawnmower, when the sound of a heavy diesel engine rumbled down my driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside. A large tow truck, the kind they use for hauling semi-cabs, was reversing toward my dock. Standing beside it, looking immensely pleased with herself, was Pamela. Flanking her were two of her loyalists, Louise Mendez, a former paralegal who acted as the HOA's legal muscle, and Mike Danvers, the self-appointed head of neighborhood security. Mike was wearing a tactical vest over a polo shirt and had a serious expression, like he was managing a hostage situation. The tow truck driver, a big man with a weary look on his face, was staring dubiously at the boat. "That's far enough," I said, my voice calm and even. I walked toward them, stopping at the edge of my lawn. "This is private property," Pamela smirked. "Not for long, if you don't pay your fines. We have a lawful order from the board to impound the nuisance vessel." She held up her clipboard, as if it were a legal warrant. "I don't think you do," I replied. I had been preparing for this. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a Ziploc bag. Inside was a laminated copy of the state code governing private property and vehicle repossession. I also had a GPS printout from the county surveyor's office, clearly showing my property line extending to the water's edge. "According to state law," I began, my voice clear enough for the tow truck driver to hear, "you can't remove a vehicle or a vessel from private property without a court order signed by a judge. An HOA board resolution doesn't count." I then held up the map, and this boat is moored to a private dock on a private lot. The moment your truck's tires leave the asphalt of my driveway, you're trespassing. The moment your hook touches my boat, it's attempted theft. I'm already recording this encounter, and I assure you, the sheriff's department will be very interested to see it. The tow truck driver looked from me to Pamela, then back to his truck. He was a working man. He recognized the sound of expensive legal trouble when he heard it. He grunted, "She's right, lady. I need a court order for this. My insurance won't cover it otherwise." He climbed back into his cab, started the engine, and pulled away without a backward glance. Pamela's face was a mask of fury. Louise started whispering frantically in her ear, and Mike puffed out his chest and took a step forward. "We have every right to be here to enforce community standards," he blustered. "You're creating a hostile environment." "The only hostile act here, Mike," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "was bringing a tow truck onto my property without legal cause. Now I'd like you all to leave." They stood there for a moment, impotent and furious. Defeated, they turned and walked back to their cars, the triumphant procession turning into a walk of shame. I knew it wasn't over. I had won the battle, but Pamela was the type who would burn down the whole village to win the war. The next day, she proved it. She took my recording of the incident, cleverly edited it to cut out all my legal explanations, and spliced it together with shaky phone footage of me walking in my yard. She posted the edited video to the neighborhood Facebook group with a new, breathless caption. "Concerning behavior on Lot 18. Resident becoming increasingly aggressive and claiming to be a sovereign citizen, not subject to our community rules. Please exercise caution." The sovereign citizen line was a masterstroke of malice. It was designed to paint me as unhinged, dangerous. It was a lie, but in the court of online opinion, it didn't have to be true. It just had to be scary. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My daughter Maya called me that night, and this time, there was no hiding the tears in her voice. "Dad, they're attacking me now." She worked as a marketing manager for a small firm that did business with a company owned by one of the HOA board members. She'd been a finalist for a big promotion. "I got an email this afternoon," she said, her voice breaking. "We're structuring the department. The promotion is off the table." My boss couldn't look me in the eye. He said it was because of the unfortunate public drama with my family. "Dad, they're trying to ruin my career because you won't move a boat." My blood ran cold. This wasn't about property values. This wasn't about rules. This was a personal vendetta, and they were using my daughter to hurt me. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made my hands shake, followed by a wave of crushing guilt. Maya was right. I had brought this into her life. "I'm done, Dad," she sobbed. "I'm just done. You have to stop. You're making everything worse." She hung up before I could say anything. I sat there in the dark, the phone heavy in my hand, feeling a profound sense of failure. I had tried to stand up for a principle, to protect my wife's memory, and in doing so, I had hurt the one person I had left to protect. The fight went out of me. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe I should just sell the boat, pay the fines, and try to disappear inside my own home. Let them have their ugly little victory. Just then, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mr. Braddock?" a man's voice asked. "This is David Chen, from the county attorney's office. I'm calling about the claim you filed on parcels 4B and 4C, the Lakeview Point lakebed." My heart started pounding, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. "Yes?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, the public notice period has expired, and we've received no competing claims or objections," he said. "Are you still interested in acquiring those parcels?" That phone call from the county attorney changed everything. All the doubt, all the guilt from my conversation with Maya vanished. It was replaced by a cold, clear focus. They had come after my daughter. They had tried to damage her career to get to me. My quiet defense was over. This was no longer about protecting a memory. It was about protecting my family's future. The fight wasn't just worth having. It was necessary. "Yes," I said into the phone, my voice steady and firm. "Yes, I am still very interested." The process from there was surprisingly simple. Since the property was unclaimed and generating no tax revenue, the county was more than happy to get it off their books. My attorney and I structured the deal through a sealed bid process. I was the only bidder. The price for 30 acres of underwater land and all associated riparian rights was laughably low, less than the combined total of Pamela's bogus fines. We didn't put the property in my name directly. That would have raised red flags. Instead, we created a private trust. It's a simple legal entity, like a blind box that holds assets. On the official documents, the owner of the Lakeview Point lakebed was listed as the S.B. Legacy Trust, Sarah's initials. The final deed was recorded at the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning. It was an anticlimax, a quiet stroke of a pen on a dusty ledger that shifted the balance of power in our entire neighborhood. No one knew. The HOA continued sending me daily fine notices. Pamela continued her crusade on Facebook. They were firing cannons at a ghost ship, completely unaware that I had just captured their entire harbor. My first move as the new owner was quiet. I hired a marine surveying crew. On a calm Thursday morning, they motored out and installed 3 simple white buoys in the lake. To any casual observer, they looked like standard navigational markers, but they weren't. They were precisely placed on the new property lines I now owned. One marked the edge near the common area dock. Another marked the boundary near the community's irrigation pump inlet. The third was placed 50 feet out from Pamela Greer's own waterfront backyard. My attorney then filed for exclusive use zoning with the County Planning Commission, citing conservation and private recreation as the primary purposes. It was another piece of bureaucratic paperwork, another gear turning in a system Pamela didn't even know existed. With the deed recorded and the zoning in progress, it was time to announce the change in ownership. I didn't call Pamela. I didn't post on Facebook. I let the system do the talking. My attorney drafted a formal notice. It was printed on heavy, legal-grade paper. A week after the sale was finalized, a process server delivered a certified envelope to every single member of the HOA board of directors. I imagined Pamela opening hers, expecting it to be another legal filing from my attorney about the fines. Instead, she would have read this. To the board of directors of the Lakeview Point Homeowners Association. This letter serves as official notification that as of date, all submerged land, lakebed, and associated riparian rights of the body of water, commonly known as Lakeview Point, are the private property of the S.B. Legacy Trust. A copy of the recorded deed is attached for your reference. All existing structures, including but not limited to docks, piers, irrigation pumps, lighting systems, and decorative fountains currently encroaching on this private property, are now considered to be trespassing. You have 30 days from receipt of this notice to remove all said structures from private property. Failure to comply will result in legal action and the levying of commercial fines for unauthorized use. Roy Tran, who had a source on the inside, called me an hour later. "You're not going to believe this," he said, and for the first time in months, I could hear a smile in his voice. Pamela called an emergency board meeting. My guy said she was screaming. Not yelling, Tom. Screaming. She's on the phone with the county, trying to get someone, anyone, to tell her it's a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. The clerks at the county office would only be able to confirm what the deed said. The property had been sold. It was legal. It was final. The trap had been sprung, and she was caught in it. That afternoon, a small, buzzing sound grew louder from over the lake. I walked out onto my dock, coffee in hand, and looked up. It was a drone, the kind photographers use for aerial shots. It hovered over the lake, making a beeline for Pamela's house. I knew exactly who was flying it. Maya? I had called her the day after the sale was finalized and told her everything. There was a long, stunned silence on her end of the line, and then she had started to laugh. A real, genuine laugh. "Dad, you bought the lake?" she'd said, a note of awe in her voice. "You actually bought the whole lake." She had called a friend of a friend who ran a local news blog. The blogger, who had a long-standing dislike for overbearing HOAs, loved the story. The drone was his. I stood on the deck of the Hope Floats, my wife's boat, the eyesore that had started it all. The drone flew over my dock, dipped its camera in a nod, and then headed straight for the emergency meeting happening on Pamela's back patio. I raised my coffee cup in a salute. On Pamela's lawn, a small crowd of board members were gesticulating wildly. Pamela herself was on her phone, pacing back and forth, her face red with rage. She was trapped, her entire empire crumbling because she never bothered to check what was right under her feet. She'd tried to take my home, so I took her lake. The emergency HOA meeting was held 3 nights later in the clubhouse. Pamela had no choice but to call it. My legal notice had circulated, and the neighborhood was buzzing. For the first time in years, the room was packed. People I hadn't seen in ages were there, drawn by the scent of drama, their faces a mixture of confusion and cautious excitement. Pamela had set up a projector and a screen at the front of the room, a clear sign she intended to control the narrative. She and the rest of the board, Louise, Mike, and 2 others who rarely spoke, sat at a long table, looking grim. I walked in just as the meeting was starting. I didn't sit in the back. I walked right down the center aisle and took a seat in the front row. I was wearing my usual denim shirt and worn-in boots. I didn't carry a briefcase or a stack of papers. All I had was a small digital audio recorder in my pocket. The room went quiet as I sat down. Every eye was on me. Pamela cleared her throat, her voice tight with forced composure. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, reading from a prepared statement. "As you may have heard, the board has been made aware of a complex legal situation regarding the lake. We have received a baseless and hostile claim from a resident. She didn't look at me, but everyone knew who she meant, alleging private ownership. I want to assure you, our legal counsel is already addressing this frivolous action. This is nothing more than a desperate tactic by a non-compliant homeowner to avoid accountability." She clicked a button, and an image of my house appeared on the screen. The hope floats circled in red. This all started because of one resident's refusal to follow the same rules we all agree to live by. So, that was my cue. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke from my seat, my voice calm but loud enough to fill the room. "That's not true, Pamela." Head swiveled toward me. Pamela glared, her knuckles white on the table. "You are out of order, Mr. Braddock." I ignored her. "It started because you invented a rule, Bylaw 7.4, that doesn't exist in our covenants. I have a copy for anyone who'd like to see it." A murmur went through the crowd. This was news to them. They'd only ever heard her side of the story. I continued, speaking to the residents, not to her. "Then you sent me fines for this fake rule, and when I tried to discuss it, you refused to speak with me." I pulled the audio recorder from my pocket and held it up. "I have recordings of my calls to your office, all of which went unanswered." Luis Mendez, the paralegal, jumped in. "Those recordings are inadmissible." "You can't," I cut her off, still calm. "It's not a courtroom, Louise. It's a community meeting, and the community deserves to know the truth." I turned my attention back to the audience. "When I proved you had no legal right to tow my boat, Pamela posted an edited video online calling me a dangerous sovereign citizen." I saw a few people nod. They had seen the post. "And then," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "someone from this board used their business connections to get my daughter fired from a promotion she had earned. They did that to punish me." A gasp went through the room. It was one thing to fight about bylaws and boats. It was another thing entirely to go after someone's family. The mood in the room had shifted. They were no longer just curious spectators. They were listening. I finally stood up and walked to the front of the room, stopping beside the projector. "Pamela is right about one thing. There is a legal situation, but it's not complex, and my claim isn't baseless." I pulled a folded document from my shirt pocket. It was a certified copy of the deed. "This is the legally recorded deed for the lakebed and all water rights, filed and sealed by the county clerk's office. The new owner is a private trust." I handed the deed to Roy, who was sitting near the front. He looked it over, then passed it to the person next to him. The paper began to make its way through the room, hand to hand, a tangible piece of truth that no one could deny. Pamela was sputtering. This is an outrage. He manipulated the system." No, I said, turning to face her directly for the first time. I used the system, the real one, the one based on laws, not on your personal whims. You were so busy enforcing rules for a kingdom you didn't own, you never bothered to check the title. That's when the biggest truth bomb landed. I looked out at the assembled homeowners. And that brings me to the real question you should all be asking. For the last 20 years, this HOA has been collecting dues and special assessments for lake maintenance. You've paid for dredging, for shoreline repair, for the common area dock lighting. Where did that money go? Because I can assure you, the legal owner of the lake never received a dime of it, and the county certainly never authorized you to maintain their property. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions at the board. Is this true? Did you use our dues on property you didn't own? That's misappropriation of funds. Pamela was cornered, her face pale. She had no answer. Her entire platform of fiscal responsibility and rigid order had just been exposed as a sham. That's when Mike Danvers, the security guy, decided to play the hero. He stepped in front of me, puffing out his chest. All right, that's enough. You're inciting a riot. Mike, I said, not taking a step back. What was your employee number when you worked security at the Northgate Mall? The real one, I mean. Before they let you go for excessive force. Mike froze, his face going from red to white. Someone in the crowd with a laptop shouted, "He's right! I just looked it up!" Mike Danvers deflated like a cheap balloon and backed away, disappearing into the angry crowd. The final blow came from a corner of the room. A man stood up, a veteran who rarely spoke at meetings. His voice boomed across the chaos. "You did all this? You fined a man for honoring his dead wife?" He pointed a shaking finger at Pamela. "My God, woman, have you no shame?" That broke her. Pamela stood up so fast, her chair screeched against the floor. She grabbed her purse and, without another word, stormed out the side door of the clubhouse. Louise scrambled to follow her. The residents began to cheer. It started as a slow clap from Roy and then spread through the room. Someone had already started a petition on their phone to formally remove Pamela and the rest of the board from office. I had my vindication, but as I watched Pamela's car peel out of the parking lot, I knew she wasn't the type to go down without one last, desperate fight. I was right. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and Pamela Greer, stripped of her title and her power, was about to make her last desperate play. 2 days after the disastrous meeting, just as the sun was starting to burn the morning mist off the lake, a commercial landscaping truck pulled up to the common area. I was having coffee on my deck, and the noise of the truck's liftgate slamming down shattered the morning peace. 2 men in dirty coveralls started unloading heavy equipment, shovels, rakes, and a portable generator connected to a high-pressure pump. Pamela's last-ditch effort wasn't legal or strategic. It was purely spiteful. Her plan, as far as I could guess, was to restore the shoreline that bordered the common area, essentially making a mess on my new property under the guise of community service. It was a pathetic attempt to prove she still had some authority, but I had learned my lesson. I never assumed she would play fair. The day I bought the lake, I had installed 2 small, weatherproof security cameras. One was tucked into the branches of a tall pine overlooking my dock, and the other was mounted discreetly on the side of my house, aimed directly at the common area shoreline. I was watching the live feed on my tablet as the 2 workers dragged a heavy suction hose to the water's edge. One of them fumbled with a 5-gallon can of diesel fuel as he tried to prime the pump. He slipped on the wet grass, and the can went flying. A dark, iridescent slick of diesel fuel immediately spread across the calm surface of the water, creeping in a rainbow sheen toward the small patch of reeds where the ducks nested. I didn't yell. I didn't run down there. I calmly picked up my phone. My first call was to the Environmental Protection Agency's emergency spill hotline. My second was to the Sheriff's Department. While I was on the phone, Pamela's white SUV pulled up. She got out and started directing the landscapers, pointing and waving her arms, oblivious to the growing fuel slick. The men were now frantically trying to sop up the diesel with old rags, making the problem worse. By the time a sheriff's deputy arrived, the scene was one of complete chaos. The deputy, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, started asking questions. Pamela immediately launched into a performance, playing the victim. "Thank goodness you're here, officer. This man," she said, pointing dramatically at me, as I walked down to the dock, "has been harassing me and my community. We were simply trying to clean up this public area, and he's created this entire disturbance." The deputy turned to me, his expression neutral. Before I could say a word, I heard another vehicle approaching. It was a dark green truck with the official state EPA seal on the door. A woman in a stiff uniform with a clipboard of her own, a real one, got out and walked straight to the shoreline. Her face was grim. "I got a call about a diesel spill," she said, her voice carrying authority. "Who is in charge here?" Pamela puffed up her chest. I'm the president of the homeowners." The EPA agent cut her off. "Is this your pump and your fuel?" she asked, pointing at the equipment. Pamela's confidence wavered. "Well, it belongs to the contractors, but I hired them." The agent made a note on her clipboard. "And who owns this property? This shoreline?" That's when I spoke up. "I do," I said quietly. "My name is Tom Braddock, and you're all trespassing." I showed the deputy my tablet, rewinding the camera footage to the moment the landscaper spilled the fuel. The video was crystal clear. It showed the spill, the clumsy cover-up, and Pamela arriving to direct the operation. That was when Pamela lost it completely. The last shred of her composure snapped. She strode toward me, her face contorted with rage. "You did this!" she shrieked. "This is all your fault. You and your stupid boat." She got right up in my face, and before anyone could react, she shoved me hard. It wasn't a huge push, but I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose board on the dock. I landed awkwardly, a sharp pain shooting up my ankle. The sheriff's deputy saw the whole thing. "Ma'am, that's enough," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. He stepped between us. "You need to calm down." He had seen the illegal dumping of hazardous materials on private property. He had seen the video evidence. And now, he had just witnessed a physical assault. It was over. He turned Pamela around, cuffed her hands behind her back, and read her rights right there on my dock. She was arrested for trespassing, causing environmental damage, and assault. The final justice was swift and public. The HOA, now under new emergency leadership, was forced to pay the hefty EPA fines and the full cost of the environmental cleanup. They had to issue a formal, written apology to me and my daughter, which was mailed to every homeowner. All the fines and the lien were wiped from my record. Maya got her promotion back, along with a personal apology from the company owner who had bowed to Pamela's pressure. The story in the local news blog went viral, and our neighborhood became a poster child for HOA overreach brought to heel. A few weeks later, when the water was clean and the neighborhood was quiet again, I installed a simple wooden bench at the end of my dock, right in the spot where Sarah used to sit. Roy came over and helped me mount a small brass plaque to the backrest. It had just 3 words on it, the same 3 words painted on the stern of the boat, bobbing gently in the water beside it. "Hope floats. In memory of Sarah." She always used to say that peace wasn't the absence of a storm, but the quiet after it passes. I think she'd be proud that I didn't run from this one. I just waited for the calm to come, and made sure it was here to stay.